In terms of queer culture, there are several political, historical and social objectives in relation to representation of queer theories in terms of queer culture. Most have wanted to create an outcome where there would be more visibility for gay and lesbian, bisexual, transgender, intersex queer people, less discrimination, more human rights, more diverse and balanced representation, and autonomous self-organisation for and by queer people. So as Samantha Searle suggests, these are the areas that she sees queer culture effectively engage more broadly with the broader world. The first one is visibility, as I said, and this is the move by queer people to ensure acknowledgement of their lives, historically absent due to censorship and social discrimination. So just to be visible is a political act. I'll go into a little bit more detail later. As I said, the second one is documentation, the recording of queer people's lives to show that queer people are present in society. So it's a very basic thing as well. Here we are. Hello. It's like, we've always been here, you know, just have a look. Positive and negative images. This is a very complex one because this analyzes the impact of queer representation, both in its negative and positive form. So there's interesting questions we need to kind of ask around that. Then there's what we call mobilization, the study of the impact of organised queer cultures on the formation of identities in politics. So this forum today is a form of mobilization. Access is the fifth one, and it means access by queer people to have spaces to exhibit, to show films, to do whatever it is that they do, access to the production of work. A self-critique or self-recognition, a critical space where queer people can go, this is fucked or this isn't fucked, and we have to get this right or that right, in terms of our own culture, not just external culture. Diversification, strategies to make sure that the communities that we support recognises the diversity of the people in the communities. And pleasure, where we can say experiencing culture, because part of culture is pleasure, and we need to be able to experience pleasure to survive. The two that I add to Samantha's topology is what I call interventions. So how in forums like this we can bring in homophobic texts and reconvert it and go, this is why this is not working, and it can kind of create a healing with queer people as well to go, this is terrible, and everybody can agree it's terrible, even though there's lots of other people that don't agree with it. And the last one is queering. How we as queer people have always read into culture very different narratives to straight people, and that is okay, and it's not reading into culture, it's actually our culture. Activist Rosa von Braunschweig, already in 1903, said how different it would be if parents became enlightened about the nature of homosexuality and learned to recognise that it is imparted by nature. If parents would learn to recognise their children's sexual tendencies from behaviour which is contrary to their own sex, and if they could then mildly and justly judge this tendency, much misery could be prevented in this world. So in relation to visibility, another theorist, Richard Dyer, said, coming out was one strategy unique to lesbian and gay apology. No other group is quite so literally socially invisible. So being lesbian and gay, queer, does not show, unlike gender, colour or disability. It is not physiologically apparent, unlike class or ethnicity. It is not something the visible markers of which you have to unlearn if you wish to disguise it. Making visible something is not merely invisible, but also deemed worthy of extermination is a radical act. And he says, being visible is dangerous, moving, dramatic, the stuff of good art. So let's turn it into good art. The second one is documentation. Documentation is an interesting process because we tend to think documentation is a recording of reality. But as Kian Tomaselli says to us, what people see is not necessarily what actually exists. That is what the theorists of ideology mean when they write that people live in an imaginary relationship to the actual conditions of existence. What is shown on films, television and photographs aren't unquestionably real. It is a representation of it. But to have some imaginary, this is my argument, to have some imaginary relationship to your history and present situation, it is to have some power over your destiny and the way you imagine your future. So by having a sense of where you've come from, a sense of where your community comes from, through documentation or a representation of your current situation is incredibly important. So many of the early gay liberation and lesbian feminist affirmation films and representations developed by these movements were a vehicle for consciousness raising. So documentation is still very important in terms of queer art. So a lot of queer art is, again, links visibility with documentation. We are here, we exist, we can see ourselves. Now, linking to that, we may be here, we may be seen, we may be represented, but it also then depends on how we represent it. So this is where the third area of Searle's kind of topology comes in, where she talks about positive and negative images. So there was a lot of invisibility for many years when queer images were never allowed to be seen. And then when finally, after some censorship laws were taken out in the 60s and 70s, mostly America, but kind of Western countries, in South Africa, but later, there were some queer images then began to appear. But often these queer images were very negative images. We were always serial killers or, from my perspective now, some of those serial killers were quite fun. But from that time, when you looked at that perspective, it was just that's all you could see. You were a serial killer, you were a murderer, you were kind of a psychological wreck or whatever. So there was only negative images. And so there were a lot of protests against these negative images. So there was the need to kind of create positive images as well, to say we are three-dimensional human beings, not just one-dimensional human being. But Richard Dyer also argues that through this positive image process, which became a little bit overwhelming, there's often conflict. So you need a middle ground. You need to be able to say, we can be full human beings. So you can be bad, good, and in between, and you can be quite boring too. So this kind of mixture between positive and negative images is kind of an interesting debate that still continues today. The fourth area is mobilization, where sites like this becomes a site of political mobilization too. You meeting people here that can help you in the future think about what you want to do with your queer work, where you want to present your work, where we can affirm queer identity, where we can affirm what it is. The next step is that we think queer culture should look at or embrace, where the gaps are. This mobilization, this forum, is incredibly important, and that's part of queer cultural development. This fifth one is access. Often in homophobic societies, queer people don't have access to the means of production because they are made to feel like they are not allowed to access that means of productions, or work that they produce through that means of productions is destroyed because it has queer content. So we all have to work towards finding and giving access to queer people as well. But the concept of pleasure itself is an important aspect of queer culture. And pleasure itself in queer culture is actually an incredible political act. So enjoying yourself, feeling good, allows for often rare pleasures in sometimes very harsh and discriminatory environments. So to enjoy a play, to enjoy a visual exhibition, to enjoy sex, to enjoy being in a community of people who understand who you are, is incredibly political. Because Eric Cohen and Richard Dyer says the pleasure of queer culture needs to be understood as an aim in itself and a counter to too much political thought, where pleasure is seen as something you can have guiltily, or have after important things, or get as a reward for doing other things. But we have to position us, rather pleasure keeps us going. It recharges our batteries, it gives us a glimpse of where we are going and helps us enjoy the struggle of getting there. So don't forget to enjoy yourselves as well, and to have respite. The two I bring into this kind of process is interventions and query. So interventions is how you can intervene in a space like this, in a heteronormative kind of space, to go, let's kind of develop queer cultural narratives and gatherings to kind of give us power to go out into the world and get our own narratives together. So queer interventions, and also I think an example of a queer intervention in the past was when very homophobic films were showed in queer environments for the queer people to debate that homophobic film in a safe environment and feel sort of purged through that experience and go, no, this is not going to have power over me. We are going to be able to kind of discuss and dissect this in a safe environment. So I think interventions, cultural interventions is very important. The last thing I want to talk about is queering. So I'm going to read this from Alexander Doty. Alexander Doty is one of my favourite writers. So he says, the queerness I point out in mass culture and mass culture representation and reading is only connotative and therefore deniable or insubstantial as long as we keep thinking within heterosexual paradigms, which always already has decided that expressions of queerness are subtextual, subcultural, alternative readings or pathetic and delusional attempts to see something that isn't there. After all, mass culture texts are made for the average, often straight, white, middle-class, usually male person, aren't they? I've got news for straight culture. Your readings of text are always alternative ones for me. They have often seemed like desperate attempts to deny the queerness that is so clearly a part of mass culture. So he's just saying there are many straight films that queer people read very differently to say straight people, and it's not an alternative reading. It is your reading. It is as valid as any other reading. There are multiple viewing positions. So in Doty's understanding of queerness, the act of reading something queer into mass culture text is a debilitating and homophobic practice. We do not read it into it. Doty argues for the liberation of queerness from the closet of connotation into a space where it can be read in the text. He also suggests that the focus of queer readings must broaden from using just the text to engage with issues around cultural production and reception. There are many queer people working in these frickin' institutions that create this straight product. So a queer reading or queering therefore would describe and foreground the queer content already in all texts, their production and their reception. And as Doty says, the day someone establishes without any doubt that images and other representations of men and women getting married with their children or even having sex undeniably depict straightness is the day someone can say no lesbian or gay has ever been married, had children from heterosexual intercourse, or had sex with someone of the other gender for any reason. So the concept of queer reading in text brings forth the issue around spectatorship, audience identification, and multiple viewing positions. So he says there has never been a queer understanding of straight culture. There's always been a queer reading. So in conclusion, in the core of this seminar and my talk, I think is embedded a hope, as always. I hope that the knowledge gathered and presented here will make a difference not only to our understanding of queer culture, but also to queer people's lives and perceptions of themselves and their achievements. And to acknowledge that the evolution of queer culture in the face of often overwhelming odds is truly a remarkable achievement. And these achievements must be honoured and above all celebrated. Thank you.